Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome all the Sarahs and the non-Sarahs. I am Jen Engberg and I am an education specialist with the Federal Systems team. Usually my, I'm here with my colleagues and I do have my colleagues here. Uh, but today, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And then as you can see, we're going to talk about McKinney-Vento and foster care. So we have a few special guests. So let's go Amy, Laura, Jeanette, and then Lexi Morley. I'll let you take it away.
Sorry, with the screen sharing, I had a hard time finding my unmute button, but I'm Amy Tidwell. I'm one of the education specialists on the Federal Systems team and thrilled to be here with you today.
Morning, everybody. I'm Laura Remigino. I'm the office specialist for the Formula Grants team.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Newton, and I do equitable services to private schools.
Did Lexi just disappear?
Uh-oh, she might.
Did I?
Oh, no, there you are.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I am Lexi Neiman. I serve as the state coordinator for houseless and unaccompanied youth, overseeing the federal McKinney-Vento program.
And I am Marley McGill. Oh, there you are. I'm Marley McGill, she, her pronouns, and I'm the foster care state coordinator. So I oversee the educational rights and opportunities of students in foster care under ESSA.
All right, I think that's everybody from OD. I apologize if I missed somebody. But we're very excited today. As you can see, we have a theme. Themes are good. It is a Beatles theme. This singer-songwriter question. So I know there was someone in the chat. Jennifer Bell from Oregon City, you're the big winner today. There's no prize. But anyway, you guessed correctly. All right, so here's our agenda. We're going to talk about the requirements for programs under ESCA. We're going to talk about building your team and what that team can do to help serve students. We'll talk about the Title I-A set-aside and then resources and supports. So, all right. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, it looks like Lexi, because we're going to do McKinney-Vento requirements first.
Thanks. We'll go in tandem all over the place to keep you on your feet. And I'm going to be full disclosure, this might show my age a little bit too. I don't actually know this Beatles song, but I know everything else. So wanting to talk to you all a little bit about what are the requirements under ESSA, how can we meet these, and then what are things we can get creative on that you all have the agency to do as districts who oversee both the foster care and McKinney-Vento students. So with that, the next slide, I see a lot of familiar names and faces, not just Sarah Martin, but other folks too. So it's nice to be in good company. So I know that some of you already know that the McKinney-Vento Act entitles homeless children and youth to a free, appropriate public education. And part of the reauthorization in 2015 also expanded this to cover preschool education that's run by districts. So not just all preschool, but specifically to district-run preschools. And the McKinney-Vento Act applies to both state and local agencies. So this is also part of our role at the state agency to be able to help support you all in making sure that homeless children and youth have access to not just education, but also the supports and resources needed to be able to attend school. And so with that, part of where our connection goes in the next slide is that McKinney-Vento works in tandem with Title I-A funds. So part of the Title I-A eligibility is that a portion must be set aside. So with that, not just setting aside funds, but that those funds can be utilized for McKinney-Vento students regardless of if they attend a Title I-A school or not. So for example, let's say you have 5 elementary schools and 2 of those elementary schools are Title I-A, but if you have McKinney-Vento students that attend any of those 5 elementary schools, they all are eligible to have uses of the set aside. So Title I McKinney-Vento eligibility automatically allows for eligible uses under Title 1A set-asides. And so that can mean a myriad amounts of academic support, but also additional instruction and educated related supports as well. And we'll get into a little bit of the allowable uses in the next couple of slides. But I'm going to pass it over to Marley to talk about foster care.
So for students in foster care, the educational rights and protections are very similar to those for McKinney-Vento students. When we're talking about foster care in this context, we're specifically referring to students who are in substitute care placed by the Department of Human Services or Tribal Child Welfare away from their parents and for whom the department or agency has placement care and responsibility. Kind of the shorthand for that is care and custody. Students who are in the placement care of DHS or Tribal Child Welfare and in the legal custody of DHS or Tribal Child Welfare. So the requirements that we'll be pointing to in ESEA center on ensuring educational stability for students in foster care, specifically students who are enrolled in a public school. So either a public or a preschool that's associated with the public school, similar to what Lexi was describing, or K-12 and additional education up through age 21 if they're in a transitional program or something that still is correlated with the school district. The age range is a bit more fluid depending on the student, but it does have to be within that public school structure, if that makes sense. Next slide. So specifically the language in ESEA that refers to the protections for students in foster care kind of falls into what the expectations and responsibilities are for the district and what the expectations and responsibilities are for state agencies. So at the district level, the expectation is that students in foster care are able to remain in their school of origin unless a best interest determination takes place that determines otherwise. These students are entitled to immediate enrollment when a new school is determined in a best interest finding or upon initial enrollment. Records transfers and other information sharing needs to take place as promptly as possible. Each district has to have a point of contact. And each district also has to develop and implement written transportation procedures to ensure that students in foster care have access to transportation. These mirror a lot of McKinney-Vento, and similar to McKinney-Vento, these apply to districts even if they aren't Title I districts. This is something that all foster care students in the public school system are entitled to. And at the state level, what those requirements are is to monitor compliance and support district implementation, collaborating with ODHS at the state level. They have sort of their counterpart system to our system at ODE for providing technical assistance and guidance, and then monitoring sort of falls specifically into the education component. Next slide. So again, every district, regardless of whether they receive or accept federal funds, must meet those kind of baseline requirements for supporting students in foster care, which is remaining in their school of origin, immediate enrollment upon school movement. Each district has to designate a point of contact, developing transportation plans, and then tracking achievement and graduation data. Specifically data that's disaggregated so that there's a clear understanding of the outcomes for students in foster care, as opposed to historically when they might have been kind of lumped in with McKinney-Vento eligible students or students experiencing poverty or low socioeconomic status. Student achievement data and graduation data for foster care as of ESSA in 2015-2016 is collected and observed in its own category. And I'll pass it back to Lexi to move on to the next topic.
to say that all together now, not we're all in this together, because I feel like that's actually like a High School Musical song, but we can
That's where my mind
pivot a
went as
little
well.
bit. So all together now and understanding what are the requirements for program collaboration. So in the next slide, there's two pieces in which a district must meet the McKinney-Vento statutory requirements under Title 1A. One is to appoint the district homeless liaison, so check on that for everyone. And then the second is that the district liaison must be consulted in the District 1A plan that includes setting the amounts for the homeless set-asides. And I just want to highlight for the group today that our McKinney-Vento state team hosted a training a couple weeks ago, and there were a lot of questions from liaisons surrounding involvement in the plans and how much districts have. And so I just want to highlight that they should be involved in those plans and in that set aside amount of data consultation or just overall program efforts. So that's a statutory requirement. So I just wanted to highlight that for everyone today, just to make sure we're closing some of the gaps with our McKinney-Vento liaisons. And so then part of that, I'll let Marley highlight the foster care realm in this next slide.
Yes, and I do see, Alicia, I see your question in the chat, and just checking in with Lexi and Jen. Are we going to be doing questions as we go or questions at the end? Which one?
At the end.
Okay. So Alicia, hi, by the way, we used to work in Redmond together. I'll make sure to circle back to your question. So just to create a visual for supporting students in foster care, we've developed kind of this multifaceted kind of visual description. Districts might have some of these folks. Not every district has community advocates or school advocates. Similarly, not every student in foster care has crossover with special education, but these are just examples of all of the different folks at the local level who support students in foster care or might be involved in that, just to give a clear understanding of where everyone fits and what roles everyone plays. Kind of the key players, the resource parent is the newer terminology for foster parent, caseworker, foster care point of contact, at the school level, school counselors, advocates like academic success coaches or tutors support that student. At the district level, this is where kind of the monitoring piece, some of the training and professional development, and really critically the policy and practices sit. So we work closely with district administrators to make sure that all the different requirements associated with supporting students in foster care that fall into the title program category are reflected in district practices and policies. We do that very directly through monitoring, but if at any time district folks are kind of taking another look through or evaluating and want to make sure that their practices and policies are in alignment, we are always here to help with that outside of monitoring. And then at the state level, myself and then I have a counterpart at ODHS. We collaborate to make sure that all of these roles, all of these systems are operating in alignment with one another to best serve students. And where there are any kind of hiccups or complications for specific cases, as well as kind of a broader systemic need for improvement, we are here to support that as well. Next slide. And then to kind of just draw that out to expand to the broader group of students that we're talking about, strategies that work to support these students, regular training and collaboration involving liaisons. This applies to both McKinney-Vento and foster care, involving them in creating school-wide goals, targeted assistance, using data for these groups of students to determine appropriate set-asides. We'll talk in a minute about how set-asides overlap with foster care and how that might differ from McKinney-Vento or look similar. And then including parents and guardians who are experiencing housing instability or who are involved in the foster care system in Title 1A family engagement activities to build capacity in supporting children's education. So because McKinney-Vento students and students in foster care have home dynamics that might look a little bit different than a traditional home dynamic for students, it's really critical to think creatively about how to engage resource parents as well as parents who might not be stably housed, or if a student is unaccompanied, how that might work to still seek and receive input and support from family circumstances that might not look as structurally similar to other students.
So, in imagining all the people that the power of the homeless set aside can help, is that next slide, please. The homeless set aside essentially has 4 takeaways from today. The first is that it is a statutory requirement that districts or local education agencies that receive Title I Part A must reserve funds for students that are navigating housing instability or eligible under McKinney-Vento. And that 2, the McKinney-Vento liaison must be included in determining the set-aside amount and the plans needed under Title I Part A. And 2 other pieces is that the amount of the set-aside should be informed by data, whether this is student outcome data or data that the liaison specifically collects to help run or operate costs of the program for supporting students. And if needed, using carryover funds that can also help support McKinney-Vento students should your district not have spent all funds in the year prior. And so with that, in talking about what you can do with the homeless set aside, there are 2 governing principles of this set aside. The first is that it must be reasonable and necessary to help students take advantage of educational opportunities. And the funds must be used only as a last resort when other funding or services are not available. And this includes both public or private sources. So for an example of this that I like to use is that birth certificates for students that are eligible under McKinney-Vento are reasonable and necessary for the student to take advantage of educational opportunities. And in some cases, if the student, let's say, is born in the state of Oregon, there's a public program source that allows the student to get their birth certificate free of costs if they're considered homeless. So that would be a program that the district would want to look into first before using Title I set-asides. However, it could be that the student was born in another state that wouldn't necessarily have a program to support, and there's no reasonable funding available to the district to be able to cover that cost. So then it's also used as a last resort. So the 2 pieces are reasonable and necessary, and then last resort. So possible methods in determining the set aside is determining a percentage of the total Title I funds reserve, the district's total fund of reserve, or multiplying the number of students who are navigating housing instability by the district's per pupil allocation. This could be something you would do next year, but not necessarily this year since the timeline is a little different, is that the set aside could match the amount of the McKinney-Vento competitive sub-grant dollars that would be received by the LEA if that's applicable. So if your district did not apply for that grant, that wouldn't necessarily be a possible method. Or the use of a needs assessment to determine what the set aside amount could be. And new this year, next slide, please, we have created a resource that's completely optional. So this is not a requirement by ODE of the LEA, just something to use to help keep track of not just the Title I set-asides, but also outside funding that may support the McKinney-Vento program. And so when completing this needs assessment or kind of getting familiar with the worksheet, some questions to consider are how many students currently this school year, how many students received services in the past, so what kind of trend data are you seeing, and then what are some of the trends in your actual community or your district that may also help forecast what needs are coming for your students. So this could be if there's new affordable housing units that are being displaced of those families to create new different housing. There's whether there's historically there's been a wildfire. There's a lot of different reasons that could play into setting aside the homeless set asides that's different than what you've previously done in school years past. And then next slide goes over the allowable uses. And so these are just a few of the options. If you're unsure of an allowable use, please reach out and ask either Jen, myself, Amy, or Sarah. We tend to always discuss amongst a group. So as long as you get a hold of one of us, most of us will hear or be a part of that conversation. And I also wanted to just briefly highlight that again, these allowable uses must be reasonable and necessary and used as a last resort. But specific to transportation, transportation should only be the excess costs under Title 1A. So it should be that general funds or other state funding or the McKinney-Vento competitive grant also helps offset those transportation costs. The entirety of what it takes to transport a McKinney-Vento student cannot solely be covered under the homeless set-aside funds. It's only used to help defray the costs because we know that historically and currently it takes more money to support a McKinney-Vento student in transportation than, let's say, that of a housed student. So I just want to highlight that, and there may be questions on that, but we can get to that towards the end. But I just wanted to let you all know. And same with the liaison salary costs. So it should be used as a last resort. So if there's other funding that can cover the costs of the liaison salary, that should be used first before utilizing the Title 1A set-asides. And then you want to go to the next slide. And something new we want to highlight to folks this year is that in the SIP budget narrative, we would really like folks to be really direct and specify what direct services they provide to students to help remove barriers to engagement and school participation in the narrative, and additionally highlight any funding or partners that also outsource these costs or these programs that help remove the barriers to the identification, engagement, and participation with students. So that's something we really want to have just on file for ourselves, but we were also federally monitored as a McKinney-Vento program, and part of our monitoring really made a recommendation for us to expand how we utilize data with Title 1A in connection to our McKinney-Vento program. So we're really asking for all of you to help us understand your programs so we can understand it from a statewide perspective, which will then also help us inform resources and technical assistance in the future. And then next slide. Pass over to you, Marley.
So for students in foster care, unlike McKinney-Vento, where there's explicit statements for what set-asides should be used or need to be used to support students experiencing housing instability, foster care sort of falls into this interesting place where the supports that are named in ESSA are still required, but as far as the funding component goes, it would be set-asides that are kind of broadly more applicable can be used to support students in foster care. So this would potentially be something like excess costs for school of origin transportation. So as many of you know, school of origin transportation is something that we have a cost sharing agreement with ODHS to reimburse for. But for example, new federal guidance strongly suggests supporting foster care transportation through the end of the school year, similar to McKinney-Vento, as opposed to kind of the previous expectation of as soon as they're no longer in foster care, because our cost sharing agreement with DHS still kind of sits in that specific definition of when they're no longer in care. Supporting student transportation through the end of the school year might be something that falls into an excess school of transportation cost. So that's just one example. Transportation for summer programming might be something that, because it falls outside of the scope of the transportation reimbursement cost sharing agreement, that could be something that would be beneficial to spend set asides on. Liaison salary, necessary supplies for school or school activities, and then fee waivers. So for students in foster care, there's also an expectation that barriers are removed for their participation in extracurricular activities. And that might be something that set asides could be used to support, because it's kind of bridging that gap between what's required and what there are explicit funds set aside for. Those are kind of the avenues where broad set asides could be used to support students in foster care.
And so changes that occur throughout the school year can be made and should be made when new services or supports are implemented, or there's any sort of unforeseen event, like I mentioned before, where there's infrastructure changes or natural disasters that occur to the community that may change the amount of students needing to be served that year. And we also want to highlight too that changes in the SIP budget narrative, while we know ODE is changing the system as a whole, in the future, we want to also make sure that we're upkeeping changes or additions in district contacts, so we know who the point person is for foster care, McKinney-Vento, any of the formula grants, so that we can help close any gaps or answer any questions needed. And as well as in tandem with that, because that's a monitoring requirement, being able to address any monitoring resolutions that come from being monitored by ODE. So those are just 5 opportunities or situations that you may experience that would require a change in the set aside or go into the set budget narrative and change. And the next slide.
So overall, to kind of put a finer point on it, for Title 1A, McKinney-Vento, and foster care, while all of those programs kind of have their own components, the common goal, and I think a beneficial way to think of it, is really that they are all tools and avenues to support students with the common experience of high mobility, educational barriers, and a likelihood for educational discontinuity. So for students experiencing housing instability and students in foster care, there are students who have unique circumstances where they have eligibility for both programs. It might be one or the other. It might be something that kind of falls on the outskirts of any kind of specific designation. But overall, it's helpful to think of all of these different programs, whether they fall into kind of the camp of money, of requirement, or both. The common goal really is to support the same students experiencing the same struggles, and that the partnerships and tools used to meet the requirements and meet the financial requirements as well as the student services requirements, using all of the tools to make that happen, whether those are kind of the literal tools of funds and resources, or the pieces of collaboration, partnership, utilizing the expertise and resources of other agencies and other partners to meet the needs of those students.
And with that, wrapping up with my favorite Beatles song, Leaning on Me and the other folks at ODE for any questions or clarifications we can provide. But we also wanted to provide you with some resources. Here's just kind of 5 main pieces NCAG, our National Center for Homeless Education, has a brief that's specific to serving students who are navigating housing instability under Title I Part A, as well as much of a dry read that it is, our non-regulatory guidance under US Ed for the McKinney-Vento Act is also a really great place to learn about the tips, allowable uses, anything that is supporting students under Title 1A as well. And I also wanted to highlight too, for those that may also receive a competitive McKinney-Vento subgrant here soon, is that the authorized activities under McKinney-Vento are similar to that of Title 1A. So the Sweet 16, as they call it, are also authorized activities. And I sent a link at the second bottom where it says second to the top, where it'll outline the 16 uses as well. And as always, our main McKinney-Vento page for any other links, and I will let Marley do hers.
So for foster care, as far as some relevant resources to share, we have data, state-specific data. So things that were collected and reviewed by OKID, OHA, other agencies within Oregon who are looking at and evaluating the same things that we are. In addition to that, on a broader level, the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education, so that falls under the American Bar Association. They're a really critical federal partner, and they have a lot of excellent resources, and also connect with the U.S. Department of Education, who has released their new guidance. And then children's rights, having that broader insight on the crossover of youth in foster care and youth who are LGBTQ plus identities. So those are kind of the data components. In addition to that, just on a functional level, the transportation request form, school notification form, those pieces that facilitate strong communication and collaboration with DHS at the local level. And then a couple of resources for supporting students in foster care from the family perspective. And then the foster care key messages page, that is where you'll find links to past office hours, past newsletters where we share the most up-to-date and relevant resources. We're working on all of those things as well as webpage updates right now to have it reflect our newer resources as well as new things coming out at the federal level. So feel free to review any and all of these, and of course always to reach out. I think the next slide we have our contact information. So myself, Lexi, and then Jennifer Sappington, who supports both programs, as well as the specific foster care transportation reimbursement program and process. She oversees the reimbursement and grant aspect of foster care transportation. So I think that is the long and short of it for our programs.